Okay. I'm live, it says. Hello, friends. Welcome back to SerenityOS Office Hours. As tradition goes, we always start with me not being completely sure that it is working, but these are starting to. People are pretty good at knowing what I'm looking for. So thank you, everybody, for letting me know loud and clear. Very good. It is working. Thank you. I think I only messed it up the one time by having my microphone on mute, but I can just never let that go. Ooh, what are these? These are new. Very interesting. I don't know what these mean or who's making them, but you can see them, I guess. Yeah, of course you can. The little party emojis. Whatever is causing those, that's pretty neat. Anyways, it is Friday. It's great to see everybody here. And we're going to do what we always do on Fridays, which is to talk about SerenityOS and the related projects. So if this is your first time here, the way it typically works is that people ask questions or make statements, I suppose, about SerenityOS or programming or whatever comes to mind that seems related to those things, and then we look into stuff. So anything goes as long as it is on topic, basically. It is lovely to see so many people here. A bunch of golden yaks in the house. Nice to see all the supportive golden yak crowd. Thank you for that. All right. So while we wait for somebody to ask some intriguing questions, I can tell you what I've been working on, which is yakt. And yeah, Milan is asking precisely about that. So yes, I've been working on yakt, and basically what happened was like 2 weeks ago or so, I started feeling like a little mild freak out, wondering like, oh wait, was this yakt thing actually a good idea, or is this like a colossal waste of time and effort? And then I spent a day sort of reacquainting myself with some other languages, and then I wrote some yakt after that, and I remembered why I wanted to do yakt in the first place, because it is just so much nicer than all the other languages, in my very biased opinion. But yeah, so that's kind of what got me really hyped about it again, was just that I spent some time with the alternatives, and then just got this big reminder of, oh, right, there isn't really anything as nice as I would like. So that's why we started doing it in the first place. Anyway, so I've been working on a bunch of stuff for it. I did 2 videos, if you've seen on the channel, where I built like a toy DOM CSS thing, and also yesterday I did a PNG decoder, which was a bit more than toy-like. So just kind of porting the Serenity PNG decoder to yakt, and it was really, really interesting. Although it went for like 2.5 hours, which was a bit, I don't know. I'm not great at like sustaining my level of energy for that long while recording. But I was able to hit an interesting milestone by the end, so it was all good. So some of the stuff that we're working on today is matching on primitive enums. So this is actually not in yet. Let me just make a thing here so I can show you what it looks like. Is that not what I called it? Primate, okay. Yeah, so we have the ability to declare enums with an underlying integer type, so you can do this. And a problem that we've had, oh, wait, why don't you like that? Invalid enum definition expected. Okay, that's weird. A problem that we had is that it wasn't possible to match on these enums. So you couldn't do like let E and then match on E. because we just didn't have support in the type checker or the code generator in the compiler to handle these types of enums. So that's something I've been implementing today so that you can do stuff like this. And of course, the benefit of this is that this makes a much, much simpler C++, which is the big benefit. So if you don't give it an underlying integer type, what happens is that it becomes essentially a variant. So in C++, this would become something like that. And it actually inherits from variant, I think. So it becomes like this. And these are probably the biggest source of compile time slowdown that we have in the language. So offering alternatives where you can do this, if you don't need to store any fields in your enum variants, then generating C++ that looks sort of like this instead is obviously not as rough on the compiler as this kind of thing is. So that's one thing that I was working on today. And also just there are so many little things that come up when you try to build something bigger in the language. And I was telling JT this morning that I really, really enjoy writing in yakt. 90% of the time, it's so smooth. And we just need to chip away at the 10% of the time when it's not smooth. So that's sort of where I'm at with that. Anyways, let me actually read the questions because I wasn't reading. Fausto Tomasi was saying, what languages have you looked at? I'm looking forward to diving into yakt this weekend finally. So I've looked at many, many languages. The ones I reacquainted myself with were Rust and Swift, primarily because I wanted to see where they were at and just, get the feeling of writing in those languages again. And I've also looked at some smaller languages, but they all had various idiosyncratic things that I didn't really like. And it's not to say that these are bad languages in any way. I don't have any problems with Rust or Swift or any problems with anybody who wants to use those languages. But I do think since we have a very specific use case in mind, it's very interesting to me to try to tailor a specific language to the specific use case and see how nice of a language you can make if you kind of don't make it super general and you don't make it super distributed and you don't make it like you don't impose these constraints that you have in a more open ecosystem. Felix says, hello, do you have tips on working without getting distracted or having no motivation when working on your own projects? It is kind of difficult when there's no one to hold you accountable. I think for me personally, my main trick to not get distracted is that I put myself into a space here where there isn't anything interesting around me. Like I just have a green screen behind me and just a computer in front. No distractions, no pictures or moving objects, just a very boring environment. And I think everybody's different, of course, but that's something that works for me. Like just put myself in a really boring environment where nothing tries to take my attention. Then, of course, there's a lot of stuff on your computer that can take your attention. And there are different approaches to dealing with that. For a long time, I was using these site blockers. So I would use an extension in my browser basically, and then block websites where I felt that time would be wasted if I would go there. So sites like, like Reddit or Hacker News or these kind of pure consumption websites where you're just taking things in, but you're not posting or participating in any way. But everybody has different consumption patterns and different things that take away their productive attention. So you would need to figure that out for yourself. But as you say here, like, it is difficult when nobody's holding you accountable. I think something a way to make yourself accountable is to be more public about what you're doing, and that's definitely something that I have benefited from. I benefit from right now, right? The fact that I have a schedule where I stream every Friday, so I go on here and I talk to people and open myself up to questions, and I try to post regularly on Twitter, like progress that we're making on the browser and stuff like that. And by just like doing work in public, I feel like it creates a kind of accountability. It's not that direct accountability of somebody, like a person being specifically responsible for you doing stuff, but it makes me feel more responsible when I build in public, because if I were to suddenly just go radio silent, then I know that some people would ask like, hey, what's up? And that works for me. I don't know if that would work for everybody, but that would be maybe a tip that you could adapt. Thomas says, you've done 80% of the work on yakt. Now only the last 80% remains. So true. That is very true. But man, it is, the language is getting so nice to write in. Like the video that I was doing yesterday, I was thinking about it afterwards, like how nice is it to write in this language? It just needs a little bit of love, a little bit of polish here and there, and we need to improve a couple of weak spots, but I don't know, it's so smooth. It feels like I'm writing pseudocode, which is awesome. Anyways, I'm not going to sit here and gush about that. Instead, let's take another question. Clement says, the good thing of being jobant is that now I can watch Office Hours live. Well, I'm sorry to hear that you are jobant. I hope that you become job eventually again. But regardless, it is nice to have you here live, I suppose. Sophia says, I find it kind of interesting that you call an entire operating system with browser a very specific use case. Yes, well, perhaps my perspective on these things is a little bit different than what you would normally hear from programmers, but when I look at my day-to-day work, it does feel like a specific use case. Sam Atkins says, one trick I use to avoid distraction is I time how long I'm working on each task. It's a small thing, but being on the clock and wanting the measurement to be accurate helps me. That's a kick-ass thing, honestly. I think the downside to that particular approach for me personally is that it reminds me of some programming jobs I had where there was this like extreme emphasis on always timing everything that you're doing, which I don't know. I didn't enjoy doing that in a context of that job, but that's just a particular sourness from the past that's not relevant to what you're saying. I think that's probably a really good trick. Like estimating how long a task is going to take and then doing the task and then comparing the actual time it took versus the estimate, that's a really valuable skill to improve. Graham says, hey Andreas, I saw the discussion on changing a function to fna, that leading to maybe changing public to pub. Wouldn't it be possible to have both and the user could choose? I think that would be very silly to have a language that accepts multiple keywords for the same thing. There's no reason for doing that. Like we don't want to have deviations in style in the Serenity code base. Like we want people to write code in the same way. That's why we have a style guide. That's why we force everyone to use Clang format so that the code looks consistent and like accepting different keywords for the same thing would just go against that general strategy. So I don't think that would be a good idea. Let's see. Jason L says, so nice. When I finish cramming my data structures homework to be finished, and I open YouTube to a new feature movie length yakt hacking video. Yes. It got a little long yesterday. I was running low on oxygen in the end, which was an issue. And I don't know. I guess you can't really see it in the videos, but sometimes if I sit in here for like 2 hours plus, I start to get a little foggy and I start to sweat a little bit. And it's probably not very healthy, but it does happen. And yesterday was a bit like that. Like when I finally got the image to show up on screen, the PNG that I was trying to decode, I felt a great relief that I would be able to wrap up the video. But yeah, I was kind of concerned about the bottom right pixel, which I don't think that's the right color. It doesn't feel like the right color. But yeah, see, like it's supposed to be a bit yellower. So there's some bug to track down. Yeah. Let's see. Sam said, I used to make estimates too, but now I don't bother. Well, for me personally, like the single thing that made me super good, in my opinion, at estimating how long things is going to take is making a YouTube channel where I make programming videos, because I want my videos to be, for the most part, excluding yesterday, I want them to be around an hour max. And that has just forced me to learn how to identify programming tasks that I can do in 1 hour or less. And that's kind of, yeah, that's been very helpful. And I'm sure that I could impress a typical software engineering manager with this skill, but I haven't had a chance to make use of it in that context. Clement said, I'm jobbing on purpose. I'm having a working holiday visa in Japan for a year from June, and I saved enough to not have a job. I'll just work on side projects and open source. Dude, that's so cool. Then you are living the good life in Japan. Well, starting in June, I guess, if I understand that correctly. So, awesome. N says that writing a parser is the best way to escape depression. It is honestly pretty relaxing to write parsing code, because it just feels so wholesome and self-contained somehow. Like it's a simple problem, and you just have to like consume the tokens and output the right parse tree. And I don't know, it feels a bit like anytime I'm parsing something, it always feels like the calm before the storm, before like the actual programming has to happen. Parsing is like the easy part of most things. Neon Nomad says that that's CO2 poisoning. Get an exhaust fan. LOL. Yeah, I do have some manner of exhaust in here actually, but it is not working super well. I do need to. There were some people here to check how it's working, and they said it's working fine, but I don't think they expect me to sit in here all the time, and I should probably have told them that I do that. So I may need to get that thing rechecked. Jason said, have you considered writing yakt in CLion/IntelliJ, or are you content with VS Code? I honestly would like to eventually work in CLion again, and there is a yakt plugin for CLion, but it is lagging behind a little bit. It wasn't updated in a couple of months, and I haven't really figured out how to work on that thing myself yet. So it is, let's see where, oops, that's not where that is. It's on Matt's GitHub. Matco98. Good old Matt Olson. Has a Yakt IntelliJ plugin. So this thing, it's updated in January. So it's actually fairly recently updated. Just needs a little updating again, I think. Probably something I could do myself. Or anybody could. But yeah, I would like to eventually migrate back into CLion because VS Code is all right, but it really feels more like a really powerful text editor than it feels like an IDE to me somehow. And I don't really know why. It might just be because I haven't spent as much time with it as I have with CLion. I don't know what it is. It somehow just feels like a text editor. Anyways. Let's see. HPQOEU says, I'm curious as to when you would consider importing technologies from other operating systems for Serenity, things like maybe LVM or RaidFrame, etc. I assume this would be done the same way Pledge and Unveil was added. So I don't know specifically what LVM or RaidFrame are. Is that like a logical volume manager thing? So I assume this is related to storage. Yeah, okay, so software RAID. I am not opposed to implementing same strategies. Like obviously we have the Pledge and Unveil strategies from OpenBSD. We have purgeable memory from Mac OS and various other bits and pieces like nabbed from where bits and pieces come from. And I have nothing against doing something like that. It's just that I haven't worked on storage in forever. It's been years since I touched storage code at this point. And I mean, in any sort of architectural capacity. But I wouldn't have any trouble with somebody implementing similar things in our storage code. It is definitely an area where we are not sophisticated. So becoming sophisticated would be cool. And then we got a super chat from Nico with the cute hippos coming out of the water, as always. And Nico's weird, like, what is that? Like a kabuki artwork or something? I don't know what to call that. But thank you, Nico, for the super chat. Really appreciate that. Let's see. Neon Nomad said, get a monitor to check CO2 levels. Keep an open window when working. Yeah, normally I often have an open door. Like I have an open door right now. I don't know why I didn't have an open door yesterday. That was a bit stupid. I should just, I'm gonna get a meter. I'll get a meter. That is a great idea. Let's see. Zaggy. What's up, Zaggy? Zaggy says, I used to think the same about VS Code, but since using it for C++ development, it's become my preferred, although I haven't tried CLion yet. The only problem is I can't debug Firefox on Windows in VS Code since the MSVC debugger doesn't support child process debugging. Yeah, I don't know much about Windows anymore. But that does sound like a deal breaker. This message is health. Yeah, the YouTube is a bit sensitive sometimes. I think this was a perfectly lovely message. Right, so Jason was asking, what's the difference between class and struct in yakt? I see them used interchangeably in your videos. So there's actually a difference. So structs are sort of like value types. So if you make a struct point, and then it has an X and a Y, then you can copy these around. So if I do let P2 is P1, P2 is now a copy of P1. If this were a class, it is now a reference counted heap allocated object, and I have to make them public to make them accessible. So classes are heap allocated, reference counted, And P2 here points to the same object as P1. So they're not value types in that way. So there's this pretty big difference, right? The equivalent in Serenity C++ would be like struct is just struct point, and class point becomes class point public ref counted point, and actually also like public weakable point, and it gains a bunch of convenient amenities, and much of the sort of the memory safety of yakt is built on classes being reference counted, so that you if you pass them around and you store multiple pointers to a class, they're all strong reference counting pointers, so you don't end up with a dangling pointer. Class is global, says Neon. Class is, there isn't really a concept of global variables or anything like that in Serenity yet. You have freestanding functions, but I don't know exactly what you mean by class is global. Let's see. Calculated Risk Taker says, around March 2021, top task menu bar was removed from Serenity. I like the current bottom only taskbar, but what was the original reasoning for the first implementation and what didn't work out? The original implementation was just something that I thought looked interesting at the time, but I ended up constantly irritated with the design and the sort of discontinuity between a window and its menu. And you had to travel like an arbitrary distance from a window to reach its menu, which felt very unnatural. And I much prefer the interaction model where the menu is part of the window. So it's always in a predictable location relative to the window, rather than in a predictable location relative to the screen, if that makes sense. It's just a much nicer interaction model in my view. Let's see. Vova says, hi, what do you think about Rust? Did you give it a try? Yes, I have given it multiple tries, but I haven't written enough code to really have an interesting opinion about it, honestly. I usually hold myself to the standard that if I haven't written 100,000 lines or so of code in the language, I don't think anybody really needs to hear my opinion about it, because it's not, I don't have enough experience to have like an interesting, nuanced opinion. But yes, I have spent time with Rust, and it's definitely a language that can do a lot of interesting things. Let's see. RS says, I'm not an operating systems or C++ developer, but I've been dipping in and out of your content for a few years now. Sometimes I put your channel on TV while I do stretches in the evening. Well, if that helps you stretch, cool. Yeah, I hear from people sometimes who watch my programming videos while not being programmers themselves, or while not being like not knowing C++ or not being interested in operating systems, and it's a little bit weird, but I can appreciate that. I guess I do the same thing sometimes. Like I watch people do woodworking occasionally, like just here and there, and I don't know how to do any of that, but it's still kind of nice to look at. Anyway, oh, here's a dangerous message with a juggling emoji. I think I will allow it. Nico was saying, are you good at juggling? I don't think so. I can juggle 2 or 3 of these juggling balls. I can't do the bowling pin things, but I did practice a little bit, enough to learn to handle 3 of them. But after that, it just becomes too complicated. It's too complicated to have 4 of them at the same time or more. Thank you for asking that. Very relevant question, Nico. Let's see. Andrew was asking, would you rather program 100 duck-sized yakt applications or one yakt-sized duck application? Well, I'm going to go ahead and say, I guess at this point in time, I would rather do 100 duck-sized yakt applications because I think you just gain so much more interesting experience with the language by doing many separate applications initially, and then when you're more sophisticated with the language, or in this case when the language is more sophisticated, I think we can gain more by writing like a bigger, more complex application. But it seems like right now 100 duck-sized applications would be more would bring more benefit. So that will be my answer. Super chat from Calculated Risk Taker. Thank you very much for the super chat. Asking, what was the hardest, the parts you had to learn of writing a kernel for Serenity? Huge fan, been following since 2019 first car talks. Cool. Thank you very much for the super chat. The hardest part of the kernel, I don't know. I think in terms of like frustration, I think probably the parts where you can barely debug. So getting page tables working initially, for example, and not having like a way to print out what's going on. But instead, I remember I was running in emulators. So I was running in the Box emulator and QEMU. And initially, I was even running in my own x86 emulator. And I added a bunch of code to it to print out page tables. And I just remember spending some time struggling to get the page tables working, and the extremely limited debugging environment while you're setting up the really basic data structures for the CPU. I think that was probably the hardest in terms of like what was frustrating. In terms of complexity, I guess in many ways it feels like the kernel is not complex enough that something was like prohibitively hard to learn. And that's more an indication of the kernel being simplistic than it is me bragging about how easy it was. It's not a very sophisticated or complicated kernel. There are parts that are more complicated than they need to be. And there are bits and pieces that are more sophisticated than others, obviously, but it is a pretty simple kernel. So it wasn't terribly difficult to put together. If we want to make it a good kernel, we're going to have to do a bunch of difficult things. In particular, we're going to have to clean up our locking story quite a bit. But that is ahead of us. So thank you for the super chat and for the question. Hope that answers it. Nico was saying, you mentioned you'd like to make some part industrial strength. Don't remember the exact wording this year. Did you have a specific area in mind for that? So I think, I don't remember exactly how I said it either. I think I want to make some part of the system state of the art or something like that. Basically like bring one part of the system up to as good as possible within the industry right now. And I don't have a specific area in mind. I thought it would be more interesting if I sort of let the area reveal itself. And since the new year started, I've kind of been approaching everything, all the programming that I do, I'm kind of keeping that in the back of my mind, always asking like, oh, is this part that I'm working on right now an area where I could try to push what we have to state of the art. So I was just like thinking about random things that we could do. Like I was working on our font parsing code for a while, and I thought, well, what if could we push the font rendering to state of the art? That's a big task, but like, is that something we could do? I don't know. Or you could slice it and make it smaller. Like, could we push just font shaping, but not like rendering? Or I don't know. I haven't really figured out exactly what it's going to be or what size of scope it's going to be. It's just something that I would like to do. And I was thinking about it, of course, in the context of the browser as well. There are, I think with the addition of the has selector in CSS, there is like a lot of interesting problems in how you optimize invalidation of style. And I feel like the major production browsers don't have a huge lead on that because it's a relatively new selector that just kind of it just causes a lot of chaos in how you do invalidation, because it's complicated to invalidate when you have these more arbitrary selectors. So that's also something that I was thinking about, but I haven't chosen one yet. But thank you for asking, though. That's a really it's a really interesting little pet project of mine, I guess. So I'm looking forward to figuring out what it's going to be. And if you have any suggestions, let me know. Let's see. Bart was saying, I feel you regarding the debugging. I was stuck for a good week on a memory allocator bug because something was going wrong at random places at random times. And boy, did I lack the proper tools. Yeah, I've had that too. And some of the early bugs in Serenity were like really stupid things. Like we it used to be that when we would load the kernel in the bootloader, there was originally an original bootloader which would load the kernel from a floppy disk, I think it was. And it would just load a hard-coded number of sectors. So if the kernel grew bigger just by adding code to it, it would stop loading like the very end of the kernel file, and it wouldn't complain. It would just not load it. So it would be all zeros in memory, or whatever uninitialized data was there in memory before. And that led to some real hard to track down bugs. And it was a real relief when we eventually got a more reasonable boot story where like we're actually always loading the whole kernel. No surprises where the tail end is missing. Arseni says, I noticed you didn't use Control-T in VS Code to navigate types. I think you would like it. I think I might. Control-T. Oh, you mean like that? Oh, interesting. Yeah, I should definitely start using that. Let's see if it actually works here. Let's go to the filter type. This is not at all what I had in mind. Okay, maybe it doesn't work with our IDE plugin for yakt. Seems like it might not if it doesn't know about these types. I mean, it knows the type here, but maybe it's some other endpoint in the LSP. I don't know. This might need some help in the in our LSP thing. Let's see. Andy was asking, being in something of a walled garden, do you worry that you'll lose sight of what the current state of the art in the industry is? Well, I guess it's hard to see it, of course, if you're not staying on top of things. And I imagine that in order to know that something is truly state of the art, you, of course, have to investigate who else is doing it and where they're at. But yeah, it is true that we're in a bit of a walled garden. But I think that's always the case. Like everybody is always like dug deep down into their own stuff. Like people at Google are not, like people who are working on Chrome are probably not super actively reading the latest Firefox changes or WebKit changes or whatever. I'm sure that they're aware of major developments, but you know, you kind of just tend to focus more on what you're doing. So you do develop some blindness to what others are doing. And yeah, I mean, you're right. It is something that you have to actively seek out, like to really discover where other people are at with stuff. So we'll see. Butterfly says, hey, when will you program SerenityOS using SerenityOS? when it is more convenient than doing it on Linux. Neon Nomad says, do you know about / have you thought of making a training course / room for yakt on Udemy or TryHackMe, etc.? So I think once the language is a bit more complete, then I definitely want to put together some kind of training material for it, even if it's just for our community. But it still feels like there are some components that we need to figure out before we start worrying too much about that. Something that we very recently started poking at is lifetime. Like Ali did some initial work on lifetimes, and we need to make it a bit more sophisticated. And I would like to see sort of how that pans out before committing to making education material. But we're in better shape today than we've ever been. So I think I just need to feel a little bit more confident about the whole thing. MSELRHD says, are you planning on taking the PNG decoder you wrote in yakt and replacing the existing decoder with it? Possibly. I need to make it more complete and iron out the bugs. And Nico was showing us the other day, maybe it was yesterday, it was showing us like something that Mozilla was doing with streaming architecture for image decoders, which sounded really cool. So one thing that we don't really do today is when you're loading images over the web in Ladybird, we don't show them progressively as they load. We just wait until you have the whole thing and then decode it. And it would be cool to have a more streaming architecture where we can display as much of an image as you have downloaded. But if you're on like a slow or crappy connection, or you're talking to a slow and crappy server, there are times when you have a partial image, right, that you might want to still display. So I'm not sure that the current architectures, because I kind of copied the architecture of the C++ one in the stuff I did yesterday, and it might not be the best. It's probably not the best architecture going forward if we want to have more streaming support. But one big benefit, of course, the big benefit from my perspective with anything written in yakt is that we can know that it is safe because the language limits the unsafe things you can do. So for something like an image decoder, which has to read untrusted binary data from untrusted places on the internet, having the decoder written in a safe language is very attractive. So I could imagine that the decoder I started on yesterday would eventually replace the existing one, but we'll see. Alpo says, how hard would it be to port Wine to SerenityOS, or is it tied to X11? I think there's ongoing, I was going to say. It's not the most ongoing, but there is a port. There's an issue about getting Wine to work, and people have put time into it in the past. Wait, where did it go? Wine checklist. Why is this closed? Oh, it's just old. Okay, so it was closed about a year ago. People in the past have been trying to get Wine running, and they had these nice checklists of things. And it sounds like somebody needs to go and investigate what's missing now. But it shouldn't be tied to X11. It should be something that we can support. Nico says that Chromium people are vaguely aware of color space work happening in Serenity, as far as I know. Well, how nice. I am very surprised and delighted to see the amount of effort that you are putting into color space support, Nico. It's definitely not something I thought that we would be reaching for in 2023, but here we are. That is awesome. Let's see. Hani Patel says, great gains over the years. What strength training program you followed and with what level of consistency? So I've done mostly LP programs. And in my view, like I'm pretty lazy about programming strength training. So I'm a big fan of the Grayskull program, which is kind of beginner, intermediate, and I would say probably into proficient as well. English, the Grayskull LP. Yeah, I would definitely recommend looking into that if you are not familiar. It's a basic 3x5 program, but it uses an AMRAP set for the last set of every exercise, which makes deloading a lot more interesting. But now we are a little bit outside of the typical subject of this show, so let me get back on track. Let's see. Neon Nomad said, anyone remember Beaker browser? I just thought of it yesterday, but sadly it's archived. I do not remember what that was. Sophia Ayres said, I feel like walled garden really doesn't sound right. It sounds like deliberate exclusion and incompatibility. Right. So, yeah, we're not really a walled garden. We're more like an island, if you want to call it something. And it's an island where everybody is welcome. And if you help out on terraforming the island and help out on building the various constructs on the island, then that's cool. But it's not really a walled garden in the sense that we are forcing anybody out or disallowing anything on the platform. Let's see. Lambda says, have you been to Denmark before? I've only been in Sweden once at Idrefjell. I have been to Denmark many times. I think it's, I don't know how many times, but I've lived in the bottom half of Sweden, typically the years that I've been in Sweden. And when you live in the bottom half of Sweden, it's almost like tradition that you always have to go to Denmark every now and then. And especially when I was younger, I would often accompany people who were going to Denmark to get cheap alcohol. Denmark famously has much, much lower alcohol prices than Sweden does. So Swedish people tend to make these big trips there and buy a lot of booze, beer, come back. And it's actually a really weird worm of an ecosystem because in Norway, it's really expensive. So Norwegians come to Sweden, and then in Sweden, we think it's expensive. So Swedes go to Denmark, and Denmark, they think it's expensive. So they go to Germany, and then I don't know where the Germans go, but I'm sure they go somewhere to get even cheaper alcohol. But yeah, I've been to Denmark many times. Sometimes just driving over the border into the nearest store, buying some alcohol, and then turning around. Those were not very interesting trips. Let's see. Andrew says, why would we not want to support nested enums or nested classes in YUCK? We use those a lot in Serenity C++, so not supporting them in YUCK would make it awkward to interact with the existing libraries. Yeah, I don't know why we wouldn't want to do that. I have no idea. Did I say something about that? Or did somebody else? I think we should support that. That's really useful. And I always feel awkward when I put something like this, for example, in YUCK, like outside of the PNG decoder class, and I don't want to use it outside of the PNG decoder class. So why do I have to put it outside? That would be nice to just put in there. So I think that would be a great idea, Andrew. So you have the green light to go ahead and implement it. Bart says Poland, I think. Okay, so presumably the Germans go to Poland or Czech Republic. Yeah. And then Simon says, don't get caught smuggling alcohol from Denmark to Norway. Yeah. I think that's definitely sort of this, I don't know what to call it. Like, it's like a really unclassy crime that, that a lot of people do, is that like they go to like the neighboring country with the cheaper booze, and they buy way more than you're allowed to, and they cover it in like blankets and stuff and try to get through the border. Um, I've known a lot of people who've done stuff like that, and it's to me it's like very unclassy crime. But I don't know. It's not like I've been a classy criminal my whole life either. Or what am I trying to say? It's not like I've never engaged in unclassy crime either. Thankfully, not anymore. Andrew said, I swear you said something about nested enums in the video yesterday, but I forget if it was positive or negative. I think, oh, okay. I don't remember what I said, but if I said anything, I could imagine it was like, oh, I don't know why we can't put it in there. I guess we don't support that. I don't know if we should. And then I didn't really think more about it, but you're right. It's something that we use extensively in Serenity C++, so it would just be natural to support it. And the more I think about it, the more I want it. All right, the JJ says, I mentioned it saying I wanted it. Thank you. Scriptspan says, you mentioned fonts today. I hope Serenity stays with pixel-based fonts as true 90s feel and does not adopt ClearType as default. So we already support like vector fonts and anti-aliased rendering of vector fonts, and it's something that I want to improve, but whatever the default is, it doesn't mean that you can't switch to one or the other, right? So it is something where people just have like different preferences. Some people really like the clarity and pixel perfection of a good bitmap pixel font, and I really like the pixel font. Nico says, I also love the current pixel fonts, as I will never tire to mention. Yes, I love them too. I think they're beautiful. My only problem with them is that they don't scale. So if you want to have a scalable UI, like, which is something I would really like to have, that immediately becomes a problem because you can't scale them. But I don't think it's something that we would ever not want to have, the pixel fonts, because they are crafted with loving perfection. It doesn't scale to 4K. Yeah, right, exactly, Neon Nomad. Sam says, I love the pixel fonts. They are just a bit impractical for how much work they are. Yeah, that is... they do put some spanners in the gears sometimes, which we could make it better. A problem we have architecturally in our graphics stack is that in the beginning there was only the pixel fonts, and then vector fonts were added after, like some time later, and the the metrics and stuff that you can query a pixel font for, they're not the same type of metrics that you might query a vector font for. And that's just because I didn't know what type of metrics you would query a vector font for. If I had known that stuff better, I would have made the bitmap fonts behave like the vector fonts originally. So now we're kind of left with this weird thing where the vector fonts have to fit into a weird shaped hole, a weird shaped pixel font shaped hole that I made out of ignorance for how fonts work. So I think some solid refactoring work where we just change the graphics stack so that it has like a more mature understanding of font metrics, and then adapting the bitmap pixel fonts to that would be good. Anyway, hope that makes sense. People are asking about using algorithms for the fonts. I'm sure that you could, yes. I haven't tried anything personally. I know some people were talking about doing 2x and 3x versions of the fonts, which is fine. But what if I want to have a 1.2x? Then I don't know. Zaggy says, I've been contemplating this for a while, but what are your thoughts on a Qt-based video player in Logom? I feel like it might be a bit beyond the scope of the project, but I'm curious. Main reason for that being more experimentation with performance. I have nothing against that if you want to add something like that. It might be, well, no, doing it with Qt might be the easiest path. I was going to say, like, if you just want to mess around with performance and debugging on a different platform, it might be easier to do it with like SDL. Because it is unfortunate to build a bunch of UI code in Qt. Like we're doing it with Ladybird out of, well, because we don't have a choice. What I would really love to have is some kind of abstraction that presents like a single sort of meta GUI layer that you can then use, and then it will map to libGUI on Serenity and Qt if you want to have Qt, or it could map to GTK or whatever. It's something we've talked about every now and then, but it never actually, the work never starts. And sometimes that just means that I just need to start working on it, but it would be really, really nice. Yeah, Zaggy says, an abstraction would be really nice alternative for sure. Sam says, there are other userland apps I'd like to be able to dog food more. It would be really sweet. I think taking libGUI and like trying to get that to look nice on other platforms, I feel like that would just balloon the scope of libGUI and make it not fun to work on. So if we want to build apps that are more cross-platform, it really feels like we should kind of go at it with the approach of starting with a cross-platform toolkit that can use libGUI as one backend, but also others. But it's definitely not an easy problem. But if it's something we want to do, then I think it's worth digging into. Anyways, it is 5 o'clock, and I gotta wrap it up. So thank you all for coming to the office hours. I really appreciate all of the comments, the questions, and all of the other things, the company, the super chats, and the folks with the golden yaks showing up. And I just love this silly golden yak. I can't not feel happy when I see it. Anyway, thank you all for coming. And what's the thing I say? If you end up working on Serenity this weekend, come hang out with us on Discord and share screenshots and stuff. Let's talk about what we're doing. I will see you all next time. Have a great weekend.